following Sabbath. Of all the things the synagogue leaders could get upset about, they have latched on to the most petty matter imaginable. Last Sabbath, one of them was walking home from the service on the same path as Jesus and his friends. The man was scandalised to observe that some of Jesus' followers were chewing wheat they'd picked from the fields as they passed. I'd better explain. The problem is not that they were stealing the grain. There is a beautiful line in Moses' law that insists on such small-scale generosity from farmers. The problem is not that they were eating the wheat without cooking it. Although the man did point out that they were eating this meal without performing a ritual hand-washing first. The problem is that Jesus' companions were rubbing the ears of wheat between their fingers to extract the grain, and that counts as work, even for fishermen, which is not allowed on the Sabbath day. In response to this deeply criminal act, a group of Jewish hotheads have decided to hide themselves in a hedge in order to catch Jesus and his band of outlaws in the act. Even as I write, there are 5 of them boldly suffering scratches, bites and stings from the local flora and fauna in their quest for righteousness. Their passion for legal purity was set well and truly alight during this morning's synagogue service when Jesus was asked to heal a crippled man shortly after the prayers for the sick. Are there not 6 other days in the week for doing these things? The rabbi muttered to his assistant. Jesus retorted, If your donkey fell in a ditch on the Sabbath, would you leave it there till the next day before you rescued it? Don't be stupid, I noticed the rabbi thinking, although he said nothing. Whether or not Jesus heard him, he could see the message in the old man's eyes. Jesus replied, Then why should this man, descendant of Abraham that he is, have to wait until tomorrow for his arm to be restored? With that, Jesus asked the crippled man to stretch out his twisted arm, and it was completely restored. The legalistic ambush party stomped out of the synagogue immediately, and in their present mood, they would sit on an adder's nest if they thought they had a chance of shutting Jesus up. Harpeth, the synagogue angel, went after them with a look of depressed resignation on his face. Jesus stayed for the rest of the service and is now heading towards them, chatting to his chums while they chew carelessly on fresh-picked, hand-rubbed wheat grain. Michael and Math are with them, but I insisted that Michael leave his angelic militia down by the lakeside. I'm tempted to whisper into Jesus' ear, warning him about the welcoming party that's crouching in the bushes, but I mustn't. Instead, I've perched my angelic form on the top of the hedge next to Harpeth, immediately above the synagogue subcommittee, who are far too caught up in their own fear and hatred to notice a couple of angels. Later. It was all something of an anticlimax in the end. When Jesus and his companions walked past the hedge sitters, he was in the middle of explaining a new story that he's working on and did not notice the spies. Once he'd passed, the synagogue leaders crawled uncomfortably out of hiding and followed him. They called after Jesus and pointed out that his followers were in breach of the official rabbinical application of the 4th commandment. Jesus explained patiently. The Sabbath law, like all God's laws, is given to help and protect people, to encourage them to rest and lead a balanced life. People were not created in order to keep the law. The synagogue leaders had no reply to this and turned back towards Capernaum, scratching their sore bottoms. They did not hear Jesus saying quietly, "Don't you realise it was me who invented the Sabbath?" Jesus returned to his friends and continued work on his story, but I could see in his heart a shadow of sadness at the reminder that spiritual leaders of his people are so short-sighted. I offered Harpeth a transfer to some more optimistic task, but he turned it down. Irritating though they are, he told me, I'm learning to love them. The following month. Over the last few weeks, Jesus' life has settled into something of a pattern. The mornings he usually spends studying the scriptures and praying, After that, he gathers some of his friends and they walk together towards one of the Galilean villages. As soon as word gets around that Jesus is on his way, the villagers come to meet him, bringing anyone who's sick or disabled. Jesus talks to these people, heals them in his Father's name, and then settles down to tell stories until supper time. When supper is finished, Jesus and his companions walk back to their homes and families. In all this, there are three continuing frustrations. Firstly, the religious leaders, who still see Jesus as a threat to their positions and who carefully note his every word for their private discussions. Secondly, the people, who get greatly excited at the healings and laugh wholeheartedly at the stories, but do not seem to understand what Jesus is really saying. And the third frustration is that Jesus can only travel a limited distance in one day, but cannot travel any further because most of his companions have families and jobs to get back to. Next day, Jesus climbed up the hill to meet his Father and me after all the people of Capernaum had closed their doors for the night. It was strange to watch the sun, who I could see shining brightly with the light of my boss's love, fumbling his way towards us because he couldn't see the path in front of him on this rather cloudy night. He informed us that it's time for him to select the 12 of his many friends and companions who would be able to travel with him further afield and whom he could train up to share his work. We spent the night working down his list, one name at a time. The director, who has been Jesus' frequent companion, filled in his understanding of their occasional strengths and numerous weaknesses. We gradually narrowed the list from well over 50 to less than 20. Then, while I was contrasting and comparing the relative situations of two men called Justus and Matthias, I was suddenly aware that the son had fallen asleep. As he lay there, with his head resting on his arm, it reminded me of when he was a little boy. I was about to give him a gentle kick when his father told me to leave him for a few hours. These humans are fragile creatures. I was all for finishing the job off and giving the son a list of 12 names when he woke up. I am not entirely happy about this, I explained to my boss. You saw him stumbling blind up this hill because he couldn't see in the dark. There are many things that he can't see now he's human. His insight into people's souls is limited. He may be right about Big Mouth Simon having a heart that's as steady as a rock, but aren't you worried that Jesus still hasn't spotted Judas's ambition and double values? My boss said nothing, while time drifted past us and Jesus slept. He watched his son intently, and although an archangel can never fully understand the Creator's thoughts, I could see hope and pain rising in his mind like restless waves against a beach. As sunlight slowly invaded the Galilean darkness, my boss looked at me. Oriel, there are many things that you see and he does not, but there are many more things that he sees which you never will. Now let us go. I returned to my office, leaving the son sleeping on the hilltop. When he woke, he'd returned to the village and called together Simon, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, and both Judases, and asked them to go with him. Simon is very much their leader, and in acknowledgement of this, Jesus has started calling him the Rock, which in their language is Peter. I'm trying hard to hold on to my boss's unshakable trust in his son. I cannot record all of my thoughts here other than to state that if it were left to me, I would have chosen differently.